Now I want you to imagine that we're talking about a vehicle weighing in at over 500 tonnes, not just trying to get it to move, but getting it to take off as well. So our next speaker is going to give us some insights into that challenge and explore some of the synergies between the automotive and the aerospace industry. So please welcome to the stage the Senior Vice President, Head of Public Affairs UK for Airbus, Oriel Petry.
Thanks very much. Well, good afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today in this beautiful building with a long history of technology. In 1922, I'm told that the BBC did its first broadcasts from here. So it's great to be here in this place talking about technology again. And in the last 100 years, my goodness, how technology has dramatically changed and transformed the world around us. And it means that institutions like the BBC can now reach a whole new audience. Some of that because of the satellites that Airbus builds. But I'm not talking so much about space here, rather about aerospace. I think that transformation over the last 100 years has also meant that it's transformed how we live our lives. It's meant that we have really enjoyed driving places. It's meant that we've really enjoyed flying places, getting us to places quicker, allowing us to see new things, and generally enriching our lives. So my name is Oriel Petry, as you've heard. I've recently joined Airbus as SVP for Public Affairs. In a previous job, I had responsibility for automotive, trade and investment. And that made very clear to me how important this sector is for many of the things that you've been discussing, for growth, for technology, for innovation in the UK. 11% of UK goods exports and nearly 800,000 people that you are powering, many companies here led by you in the room. And I can say, from having been on the other side, your CEO, Mike Hawes, does a very good job of fighting with government on the things that you care for most. It was always a challenging but fruitful relationship when I was in government, and now I guess I'm following in his footsteps to do it from the aerospace point of view. So I think we've kind of said aerospace and automotive are quite different sectors, though if I look at Full Throttle to Full Charge, the report that was brought out today, which starts with these words: leading net zero, supporting high-value, rewarding jobs, delivering for the economy, producing cutting-edge technology and driving exports and growth. I mean, to be honest, I could have written that for aerospace and for Airbus in particular. So I think there is much that brings these sectors, it's similar in these sectors. And I suppose one of the purposes here for me to chat to you a little bit is kind of how we're facing some of the challenges that you've been discussing today, and also in the panels that I was able to just hear at the moment. Both international and nationwide sectors, really great coverage from the government's point of view in terms of growth across the country. Sometimes, as I think you've been discussing here, the challenges that face us do feel a little bit endless, don't they? We've just been through this biggest crisis for you, I know, in automotive, but particularly in aerospace, of course, where everything in terms of travel came to a halt in 2020. This obviously has had a profound impact on aviation and aerospace, and I know that these have been big challenges for you as a sector as well. And differences in the way we work and the impact on household finances has clearly seen a change in demand for automotive as well as for aerospace since the pandemic. And just as if, just at the moment we thought we were coming out of this really, really big challenge, we're now hit with a completely new geopolitical challenge, and what comes with that. Challenges, I don't know quite so much about that for you, but certainly for us around supply chain and the disruption that that brings, but also for a business like Airbus, which remains a duopoly, some really kind of quite tricky geopolitical kind of issues that we're having to deal with. And then here in the UK, families across the UK feeling the pinch of the cost of living, whether they can go on holiday this year, whether they can afford, as my cleaner was telling me today, whether she could drive back to Poland this year because of the cost of petrol, and also food in supermarkets. So quite a lot of challenges from quite a lot of directions. But I think what comes through really clearly for me from the panels I've been hearing today, and for us as a sector, is that those challenges obviously also lead to opportunities and certainly keep us on our toes, don't they, as innovators, thinking what more we can do. And the thing, of course, that I haven't really touched on so much here, but for aerospace, as it is for automotive, is a huge challenge, is sustainability. And it's a critical driver for the change, I think, in both our industries, as we've heard before. It's, as I've said, unlocked an incredible and exciting set of new technologies over the last 100 years. And again, this idea that we're kind of really going into a new stage of technology-driven innovation, new fuels, electricity, obviously, and for us, and I know for parts of your industry as well, we're looking very closely at hydrogen. And one of the things that, we as a business are proud of, if a little bit daunted at the prospect of it, is that we announced that we have the ambition to bring into service by 2035 a zero-emission aircraft powered by hydrogen. We're also supporting sustainable aviation fuels, working very closely with government, but also with other industry players, to drastically cut CO2 emissions of aircraft compared to conventional jet fuel. We have an aim to have, we can already do 50% sustainable aviation fuel flying. We have an aim to get to 100% in the next few years, and are hoping by September to be testing 100% SAF-powered military aircraft in September. Government keeps slightly delaying this, but we have the technology and we're hoping that it will fly at the end of September, so look out for that. And I think the third bit of our strategy to address sustainability in aviation, which, as you say, is challenging when you have to lift these large aircraft off the ground, is that we're looking at just efficiency through lightweighting, and our latest generation of aircraft, for instance, is already 20% more efficient than the older generation. So this slide, basically, I like it very much because it gives you a really clear idea of the trajectory that we're on and what we're trying to achieve. Really tough, like for you, some really tough innovation challenges over the next few years, but setting a really high ambition for us because of the recognition of how we need to somehow balance the desire of mankind to travel with what is clearly a climate emergency. So similarly, I know that you as a sector now have 150 models or more of plug-in cars, and we heard a bit about that drive from consumers to be greener, and British factories across the country producing 250,000 electric vehicles, vans, buses and trucks in the last decade alone. Much of that, of course, driven out of the UK and out of your centres, and again, looking at the report that came out, was it yesterday? The spread across the country of where you are driving this innovation from, similar for us in Airbus and in aerospace in the UK more generally. For Airbus, it's the wings that are manufactured, all the wings for all the Airbus aircraft manufactured here in the UK, in North Wales, in Broughton, and the innovation that's driving the lightweighting, but also the innovation in fuel systems, how to make it more efficient, driven out of Bristol, our site near Bristol in Filton. So those are two critical parts. There's a third, which is the engines, and most of the engine, particularly for our best-selling aircraft, is actually in Europe rather than with Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce has the bigger engine for the bigger aircraft. But two of the three bits that are going to drive the real transformation for aerospace are driven out of the UK, out of technology and research that's driven in this country. Of course, I think as you've also touched on here, infrastructure is critical, and one of the big conversations, of course, that we as an industry are having with government is the infrastructure that goes with moving to hydrogen-fueled aircraft, which will mean a change in the way that the aircraft is built, but also, in fact, nearer term, the infrastructure that sits around sustainable aviation fuel and the market that we need to build to make that work. I think, from producing hydrogen to electric vehicle charging stations, clearly this is a really important thing that we have to do in partnership with government. And as you've mentioned here, of course, for us, as for you, a critical part of this story is skills and the investment in the next generation of people who are going to drive the innovation. And I don't need to tell you here that it's this new generation of scientists, of engineers, of manufacturers that we need to really transform, I think, both our industries. We can always, and this is a big focus, I think, for Airbus, and particularly for my predecessor, I beg your pardon, we can always do more also to encourage greater diversity in our sectors. I think that remains a big challenge for us all, doesn't it? And I think things like your 30% club in automotive and our aviation and aerospace charter are really actually very important parts of that story as we try and kind of make sure that the skills base here is as broad, as deep and as wide as it needs to be. I mean, one of the highlights of my role is meeting some of the apprentices. We have 576, probably more, apprentices across Airbus in the UK. And it is just an inspiration every day from being somebody who was not very good at science to hear these amazing scientists talking about with such energy about the future and how they've chosen this career because they see it as an inspiring one and one where they're contributing to the world being a better place. And I have to say, I'm really proud that during the pandemic, which really did have a devastating impact on Airbus in the UK as it did globally, we actually saw an uptick in our apprentices and were able to kind of safeguard all of the apprentices and the graduate apprentices that we had in the UK. That's fortunate, of course, because we're a bigger company, we're able to do it. But I think it was a really good strategic decision by our CEO. And of course, you can imagine as we've now come out relatively strongly out of the pandemic, actually. Last year was much better than we expected and further growth predicted, particularly in Q1 this year. Clearly, Ukraine will have an impact on how that trajectory goes up, but it's still strong growth, particularly on closer to home sort of travel. Longer haul is taking a bit longer. But that investment and the retaining those youngsters, those apprentices and graduates is really paying off now as we need to ramp up really quickly. And I don't know for those of you who are interested not only in cars but also in aerospace, you may have spotted that we've just announced a huge ramp up of our single-aisle aircraft production to unprecedented levels, which has had a brilliant impact, obviously, on the UK as well, because, as I say, it makes the wings here. So those youngsters, that skill, the investment in apprentices is absolutely critical if we're going to scale this challenge on that slide that was up there before, but also some of the challenges that you've set out here, and for some of the technological change that I suppose we can expect in the next 100 years, though it feels like that is almost too long a period to be thinking about. With that, I might sort of bring my little snapshot of Airbus and aerospace to a close. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm really happy, and I think we've got just a tiny bit of time in the schedule before I hand over to Jonathan Reynolds, but I'm really happy to take a few questions if you think there's anything that I've said sparks interest and parallels that you think would be useful for us to kind of discuss in more detail.
Hi, Richard Amnigammer from Apollo Future Mobility. I've worked in both the aerospace and the automotive sectors. So considering what you've just said about so much of the technology actually being very similar to this industry, and the previous discussion about collaboration within the automotive industry to meet some of these challenges, is there not a case for the automotive and aerospace sectors to be working together a bit more?
Right. Perhaps this is what Mike had in mind when he brought me here. Perhaps this is our starting point. I'm sure there's more that we can do. It's always a bit challenging, isn't it? And I think policymakers, as I was in the past, would love to encourage that more. But I'm sure the answer to that must be yes. And I think it's just thinking about the fora and the ways in which we do that in the most effective way. I think there is infrastructure that allows us to do it. But I suppose it requires us just to step back, which we don't always do we, because we're super busy, just to step back and kind of say, where are the parallels and how do we work together? But I think the answer must be yes, unless somebody wants to pipe up and say, that's not a good idea. But it's just finding the way in which we do it and to find the real sort of ways in which we do that in the most effective way. I suppose one of the things that I'm sort of grappling with a little bit is the way in which the kind of innovation sort of system in the UK is set up is quite vertical, isn't it? Both from the government and perhaps from us as well. And one of the conversations I'm trying to have is how you make it a bit more horizontal, I guess. Anybody disagree with that? It doesn't seem they do, so I guess it's up to us to make it happen.
Well, that was fascinating, and thank you for being so open-minded about that. And let's hope that this sort of blind date moment can materialise into some sort of cooperation across the sectors. But Oriel, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.